It only takes one enlightened ruler to produce an era of enlightenment. What will be of interest for you to discuss? What do you feel like today?
You've challenged me to think about your manifesto, and I liked aspects of it, which are to do with the consideration of power. It gets us to think in historical ways about what has happened to art over, I don't know, the last 40 years, but also in particular the last 5 years that I think you and I have been active in not dissimilar ways. We've been thinking about sort of similar questions. I think the prism of power is good to arrive at on the one hand, like what the hell do we do with today, what the subjects are. I think your proposal is super interesting. And the second is whether these subjects, these theorizations, whether the concept of power that directs our gaze, that directs artistic attention at something in particular, that's a very good question, because it tells us whether we can do anything with the legacy art world, whether there is anything conceptually there to do with the rest of the art world.
Just throw it all away.
I have a feeling that you probably don't want to do that anymore. Like, you might have wanted to do that 3 years ago, but you probably don't want to do that anymore, and your energy is elsewhere. So I think one of the things that would be interesting, if you can be bothered to narrate your trajectory, that I've been super interested in, is how your work has evolved. You know, what it is that from doing this kind of Beatrix Wolf is an idiot, let's ambush everyone, which I used to do in my criticism as well, and can no longer be bothered. It's so useless to keep doing that kind of stuff. How we evolve into a slightly more sustainable position now. And I think, you know, maybe your viewers are not so interested because they're all already on the right, they're already sort of radicalized, they're probably already, they probably already don't want to have anything to do with the legacy institutions or a legacy thought. I have no idea.
So?
Who are they? I mean, I have no idea.
I also have no idea. Maybe we should do a poll. Seriously,
not stupid.
Like, I have the idea that most of my viewers are lefties. They're sort of lefties. They, like me, they enjoy the aesthetical position, and they find maybe the right interesting because there's enormous energy there, enormous power.
So maybe to also think about what that's the source of that energy is that actually some kind of intellectual development that they're interested in, or do they just think something new is cool? I mean, I have one example. One of your patrons who I was quite perturbed to see you repost was my ex. One of the people who pay your rent is my ex. Who so energy is there, but this is not necessarily a very representative sample of the kind of people who follow you. And to think critically about what the right might be doing artistically, I think is also super interesting, because they're doing stuff, they're getting funding. As institutions are collapsing, the energy is there, no? But what on earth are they doing?
Who is getting funding on the right? I think they're like Curtis Jarvin posted, the billionaires are all not funding.
Yeah, I mean,
you know?
that is another conversation, and it has been quite tiresome to have to spend so much energy to convince the kind of newish oligarchs that culture matters. It might be that culture doesn't matter. It might be that they know something about how politics is going to go down in the near future. It might be.
But you just said that the right is getting a lot of funding. Can you answer that question?
There are structural things that are happening. They're not necessarily artistic, but there is money flowing around. Of course, I'm in London. It's a tiny microcosm of the American scene. And I have a feeling that a lot of the money that's available for anything culture is actually going to the same people that we all know. In kind of a pathetic way, someone recently asked me whether they should fund Peter Vack's film premiere in London. Whether should we be paying for 10 first-class flights from New York to London, so these people can come.
So you're saying there are rich people in London wanting to finance, I don't know, right-wing Peter Veck? I mean, in my eyes, he's a lefty also. But
it's sort of got to the level that they want to have a party, but they haven't quite understood that the party actually produces anything.
Yeah, because you think Peter Veck sucks. He's not producing anything.
He's producing the same thing over and over, isn't he? I mean, I didn't see the most recent film. I don't think I need to, but
I would love for Kate to answer this question
about our trajectory.
Yeah.
Why the pause?
Well, maybe it's because I'm hesitant to sort of talk about the trajectory in a way that I've already sort of determined it to be. But I do recognize what you say, that at some point, of course, you don't feel like fighting the same fight over and over. But I think maybe for us, it's been like a more important drive to stop or to change our way of working, is that I think those ambitious... we were always searching for something within those ambushes, and I think we found it at some point. I think I would say that there are a few pivotal episodes. 16 is the episode where we go to the museum with Philip van der Hurk, and we talk to Charles Esche, the Marxist museum director. And this was formally this was a very important episode for us, because we sort of figured out how to embed this tiny discussion, this political discussion, within a bigger drama. And in the end, you see that the subject really is Philip van der Hurk and his wife. So we were always trying to move towards portraiture. I also regard our earlier episodes as portraits, where we use the criticism of, the criticism of the artworks we are criticizing is actually a way to portray the artists, the curators, ourselves. And we've been gradually working on a way to make this more explicit, because in it becoming explicit, I think there is also the opportunity to make these portrayals more elaborate, deeper, to embed them within a broader context. So I would say that's the trajectory. And then I think then the next pivotal episode would be Honeypot, where even the political discussion becomes caricature or becomes dramatic, rather than I mean, in 16, the political discussion with the museum director is still very serious. I think we, as protagonists, still take it very seriously, whereas the discussion with Sid Lucassen is an excuse to portray Sid Lucassen beyond his political ambitions or political ideas. Something. So these are sort of formal moments. And I think the Stefan's Ennobling portraiture manifesto is a next step in this process, where the portraiture as a means and an end is also explicitly the idealism within the artwork. So so for instance, the earlier episodes, they legitimize themselves by saying, look, we're living in a democracy, everybody should be able to be critical, right? This is also how we got funding. We would say to the Mondriaan Fonds, which is the Dutch state funding for artists, we would say, you may not like what we say, but you have to support it because you support you support the democratic
It's kind of
function
amazing
of
that
criticism,
works.
don't you?
Like so many democratic systems that would not fly. It wouldn't fly in UK, for instance.
I think it's true. I think the Dutch are ultimately very, very sensitive to a conversation and to consensus. So when they feel there is no consensus, you actually have a hook on them. You can write letter upon letter and try to pummel them into submission in some strange way. But this is also this is tiring. Yes, it's very tiring. So, but this was the sort of overt activism in the early episodes, and I would say the overt activism is to say, look, the world is changing. There is a discourse going on where people are discussing the future in creative and open ways that we haven't seen for the past 70 years, I would say. And so the activism in our artwork the current activism tries to grapple with that new reality.
Look, this is super interesting, and I think the example of your episode 16 with Verdurin Museum, when you have this kind of ambush, but then a serious conversations underneath Jonas Stahl's kind of pseudo-democratic structure. This is quite indicative because you have, in a very abstract way, all the possible components in one go. So on the one hand, you have Charles Escher, or Escher, I never know how to pronounce his name, who I think you characterize as a Marxist. And without dwelling on this, I think I'll put a marker on a Marxist conception of power, which tells us that power is distributed sort of top down, and it's in kind of class hierarchical relationships. So that's one understanding of power. Then we have a different understanding of power that is actually what we are told to believe in a democratic society like the Netherlands, which something like the Jonas Stahl structure, the idea that we come together and we discuss because our discussions are sort of relevant. This is the Foucauldian paradigm of power, in which power is everywhere. Power is not necessarily situated within a particular class, and the Netherlands do quite a lot through its kind of weird NGO systems, its kind of systems of influence around the world. It sort of gives this idea that things are flat and that everyone has a sort of equal stake in the transmission of power. So, this is a system, this is an idea that dominates really post-1980, post-Foucault, dominates how we understand. And it really permeates the art world. A lot of the tensions in the now legacy art world are sort of between Marxist views of power and a more systemic understanding of power. The last 10, 15 years of clashes that we saw between different factions in the art world, even though they're never really that sharply articulated, is precisely between the kind of artist who would go and campaign for a particular issue and have an understanding that the issue matters, and those who would go and rather wish to create worlds that would give, look, by representing these, we can bring in new structures, by which they mean just have more of the same structures. And the third item you have in that episode is your collector, Philippe, your patron, who, however powerful he really is in the films, he represents your bet of where the nexus is moving to. He is a symbol of a very different understanding of power, which is Marxist in a certain way, because it does essentially say, look, I'm the one buying art, I'm pulling the strings, and whether you want to or not, you will arrange your work to please me, which is a kind of thing that artists used to understand. I mean, Pierre talks about this in very unflattering terms. There's a lot of good sociology all the way up to the sort of almost the 1990s, where we understand that you give artists money, you tell them what to do, they do it, and they believe that this is the right thing to do. Like we used to know this. Over the last 30 years, we've convinced ourselves that somehow contemporary art has completely overridden this, that the conflict of funding and artistic production could be dispelled with this completely ahistorical and under-researched understanding of artistic autonomy or arts autonomy. So I think with the figure of Philippe, you have this reintroduction of, look, there is a much more straightforward, not necessarily Marxist understanding of how power is distributed, because Marxism relies on some kind of a formation. You need to have a class. You need to decide who is who in groups in society, which we're not very good at anymore. Whereas Philippe is just kind of a one-on-one. He's buying the champagne. You do what he wishes subconsciously. So why is this interesting? I think as a moment to follow what you suggested, Kate. I think it's interesting because in Stefan's manifesto, you are making a bet that the patronage model is, in art, a good representation of how power is really distributed and how it acts in the real world. And that's interesting because it allows us a continuity. We can talk about art for the last 100 years through this prism, up to today, and not make today's production, today's response, like completely brand new. We don't have to reinvent this. But the big question is then, how do we conceptualize where the locus of power is? And that should be straightforward, because we have no end of conversations in public, particularly from the left. They should really know this better. No end of hit pieces on Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Curtis Yarvin as a kind of mediator of some of this understanding gets both profiled but completely dismissed as a lunatic. I think we are in that interesting moment where maybe the understanding that, capitalists do indeed run the world, but not in a way that Marx suggested, not in this kind of intricate way where we have billionaire, and then a class of workers with maybe the mediation of the professional managerial class. Maybe things are actually slightly more straightforward in that kind of almost monarchic way that Yarvin points to, and I think that's what you wrote, Stefan, in this idea of an ennobling portraiture where we have an aristocratic figure and it's kind of contracting. Well, you talk about court jesters in a slightly sophisticated, in a usefully sophisticated way. So I think the question, both for art but also for political thought at this point of this big political transition, would be to think whether the proposal you put forward for how power is transmitted is correct, whether this is a productive way of thinking about what is changing in the world. And then indeed, very much the next question for artists is, what the hell do we do with this? Because we know that contemporary art has been trying to perfect a way of talking about these kind of diffuse systems, and it's failing. It's not doing anything. We've had so many exhibitions and so many artworks about racism and transphobia, and it's just not producing anything because it attacks.
Yeah, I think I know how to react to your. I really enjoyed what you were saying, by the way. So this desire to bring together the reality of power to its formal attributes, let's say in art or how we talk about politics, is a desire that, for example, Curtis Yarvin shares with me. We have the same desire that things come to light, which I think is a very Western Enlightenment way of looking at the world. You want these things to be the same
Yeah.
thing in a way. You want transparency. Then maybe his analysis of the world going to a monarchy is both activistic. He wants it to happen, but maybe it's also just looking at a trend.
Descriptive and analytical
This
in
is
a
happening.
sense, what he's doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like in any pathetic artist, there's always desire for a big monarch. So I have that also. But then, whereas descriptive, I think, okay, so this is the case. So let's design an art form that can humanize this leader, so that art is still possible in this world, and it doesn't become this sort of horrible, boring tyranny. I think it's as simple as that.
So tell me about how you choose the subject, because portraiture, ennobling portraiture, of course. I mean, it's very useful that you use such a straightforward term. I think that's incredibly helpful given where we are. Look, this has existed for a long time, but what happens since the 19th century is that ennoblement through portraiture becomes the domain of the bourgeoisie. One of the ways that my father wanted to propagate his social position is by commissioning a portrait of me aged 12, which is like the most hideous piece of art ever created. But even then I understood, and I was accultured to participate in what he was doing. No idea what happened to the damn thing after. Yeah. So, but look, there is a specificity to all of this, and this is a beautiful reaction to the kind of generalizations that a lot of recent contemporary art has been doing, where we talked about people of color as opposed to a particular black person who has something to offer to us. This kind of absolutely pointless generalizations with whom no one can empathize. So I am interested in what the specificity of portraiture does, but the question remains of how do we choose the subject? How do we develop an apparatus by, well, actually, what is your kind of practical guide for this? Because you have had a bit of an evolution in your work. I'm also fascinated, the way I understand you might be bored of talking about it, or might still not really have an answer. Is two things. Like, one is how the pornographic in how you think of portraiture and indeed ennoblement, how that functions, and then the H word, like what does Michel Houellebecq, how does he fit into any of this? Or maybe he doesn't. That would be like an easy way to think about this. But there is a mixture. Like, there are many ways to do portraiture, and the stripping away, the humiliation, the kind of humiliating portrait, which is, by the way, how I think of that picture of me at the age of 12. I mean, it's nothing but idiotic. Like, a prepubescent child being painted in oil is an act of violence. If I could be so silly for a moment. Yeah. How does this develop? How does this develop for you? Is there a trajectory that you are growing with, or do you just want to change focus on something that you tried?
Yeah. This is yours. This is a difficult question.
Well, I think all these three periods maybe in our work where you so you asked about. Well, I think what we started out looking for is the erotic, Eros, in art. So, what you just said about autonomy, this autonomy as something that the artist possesses, and how it has worked out during the 20th century and now, is I think that it has completely eradicated the erotic in art, or the eros that the artist can feel. And I think our early films, so the thing that you say you share with us, you've been ambushing people with criticism. this aggression in there is in fact a response to the lack of eroticism in the relationship between the artwork the samenleving, the society. And so you have aggression. Then we progressed. Then we entered actual literal sexual territory, because we knew that this critical aggression was in fact an erotic desire. And at the same time, we were already also developing this relationship with Philip, which is also erotic, because you have your relationship to power or your relationship to money. You want to please this one person, this Philip. You want to be able to somehow survive while you're subject to his whims. And this feels this feels erotic. It feels so I think we were always coming from our vision of society from a point of view as the artist explicitly. So what do we need as artists to make art? Like, what do we need energetically, etc.? So that's the trajectory again. But I think now this sort of coincides or collides with an explicit a world wherein this those very same tensions are being explicitly discussed as well by someone like Curtis Yarvin on Twitter, etc., by you. And also, as you are becoming older, maybe more balanced yourself, you are thinking about, okay, so it's a fact. People have these desires. They are driven by the need to, I mean, if they can't, if this erotic thing is suppressed, they become aggressive. And you've seen it all in your own person. And so from that, you're able to project as well what happens when you have a class such as the one that you sort of described, the billionaire class, who are very disinterested in art and who are also kind of adamant that they don't need it. What does that mean, really? And what can I do with my sort of seasoned idea of what the function of art is in a human life?
Look, so I think this is really good. So a couple of things. I completely agree with that kind of trajectory where, so the denial of reality as you grow old. I mean, you've had a child, if not more than one, that I'm sure takes its toll in a way that's both beautiful and just like unavoidable. I've arrived at that position through just the process of aging, and partly by thinking. I'm now editing a book about like the dissolution of homosexuality, having been active also in slightly turfy circles for quite a while, and I've come to realize the denial of what you termed Eros, the denial of, in my interest, the denial of the death drive, which is a slightly more interesting conceptualization for me of, you know, what a gay man might do in art, what a gay man might do that's more daring than the rest of the world around him is doing. The denial produces this kind of flatness in which, as I was saying earlier, we have general populations making art about general populations as opposed to individuals. And without necessarily kind of going into like Nietzschean worship of an Übermensch, I think individuals are generally interesting. You know, if I'm going to fuck someone, it's probably going to be an individual rather than a class of person. And art should be a good way of thinking about fucking people, at least at some level. So I'm completely on with that. Go on.
And this also, it also ties into your experience of this portrait being like an act of violence on you. I mean, I think that's a very generous kind of something to say, because this portrait is sort of saying that you, in a completely where you haven't come to terms with yourself, with the world, with everything, are this end all of art in a way. This bourgeois assumption, and it also sort of, it both confronts you as a young man with this pre-sexual state, but where you haven't conquered anything yet, but you are already. It makes you have to wonder, why am I the bounty of this artwork? What is it? It's as if it's trying to. It is humiliating. I can completely understand why you would say that, and I'm sort of failing to put it into words why.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do with what you were saying.
This is precisely the problem we have to face. I mean, I'm in a lot of my thought. I've become obsessed with the idea of suffering. It's a very, very kind of Christian thing that I was brought up with. That even though I'm an atheist and certainly not practicing Christian in any sense, it somehow does not leave my mindset. The idea that the good thing about being gay historically until very recently was the ability to suffer, and the fact that we don't do that we've prevented that in a society is a problem. That's a difficult position to carry on, because obviously what am I doing unless I'm a hypocrite? I'm inviting suffering. And I know for a fact you have faced accusations of abuse. A lot of the time what you do has turned violent, and violence needs to have subjects. So that's kind of one problem, and I appreciate that you're trying to navigate this, and we have friends in common. After this conversations, there are a couple of people who will never speak to me again. It's that simple. What you have done, or things that people around you have done, have upset others. Michel Houellebecq is not the only person who took exception to this method. But that's an aside. My slightly bigger question, actually, that remains a big question. We don't quite know how to do this in a world in which all of the subjects of art expect art to be a means of emancipation and a means of minimizing the suffering at the cost of destroying the erotic. It is very unclear how that might be unrolled, like who's going to go first. So that's one question. But the other question that's to do more with your proposal for portraiture is to ask whether the oligarch, the subject of your portrait, has not, in fact, become one of those flat people who is a generalization. Yeah, so Marxism would have the capitalist class in some kind of flat way. They're a class, the workers are a class, then these are by necessity abstractions. But actually where we are now, where we are today, the change that we are experiencing is not a change from individuals now coming to the fore. It's not about Peter Thiel finally saying, oh, by the way, I am secretly in charge and I am a person who's three-dimensional. Peter Thiel is maybe a terrible example for this, because he is actually slightly well-known. But a person X who we don't know, but actually is in a similar position. What if that person X is indeed as flat as everyone else had become over the last 40 years, 40, 50, 60 years? What if the Foucauldian understanding of power has been not correct as to locate the source of power, but to completely flatten our ability to differentiate? Or in other words, what if your person X, unlike your friend Philippe, who might be an exception, what if X is already devoid of the erotic, that you cannot do anything about that? What if that portrait that you want to paint is going to do nothing for them? And I'm saying this with, let's think of a couple of artistic examples. Well, I can think of one, which is that presidential portraiture is a tradition that exists in the US. Can we point to the official portraits of Obama, Biden, and Trump, and find that kind of erotic there? Possibly, But my worry would be is that we need to negotiate like a means of enforcing what it is that you want to achieve, as in that ennoblement, that covenant by which the ruler, the oligarch, whoever they are, they enter through making themselves public in that slightly vulnerable state of being the subject of an artwork. They entered into agreement with the class that they rule over of a mutual responsibility. And that, while that is kind of easy to draw out in principle, and in fact we have examples of this in power, like I think Trump already has a skewed, but he does have an understanding of what it is that the public expect of him, and he does deliver. Whether that can be codified at a broader sense without either concepts like the divine right of kings, where the responsibility is created sort of almost by birth and transmitted by something like scripture, something that's unquestionable, or whether that's created through adversity, something like a state of war. My example from slightly different conversation a couple of days ago, I found myself having quite a lot of nice things to say about Volodymyr Zelensky, who is not necessarily a politician I admire for his politics, but for someone who was able to, precisely because of the adversity that he and his country are facing, to rise to exactly that kind of position of someone who is able to be portrayed not necessarily with the kind of erotic charge that you were referring to, but actually he performs under a certain set of requirements perfectly well. Having just articulated this, I'm sort of changing my mind. He's not actually a good subject at all. But the question is, how do we, if we go with the majority of the oligarch class who have that limitation that you described, they're happy to spend money on certain things, but when you tell them, actually, now I want you to spend money on art specifically, rather than the kind of banal celebration of your cultural achievement or your ability to get ahead on the stock markets and in votes. How do you get them to participate as subject? Is your Philippe an exception? And it's sort of beautiful in the context of what you describe, what you are able to do with him that I saw. But is he an exception?
Yeah, I understand your question. The way I look at it is that this text, Ennobling Portraiture, and the project we're currently working on will sort of pose this question, and we'll also try to explore it beyond someone like Philip. And I think there is a lot to say for this. It's quite likely that maybe we have all been flattened, and no billionaire currently, no monarch billionaire currently has any Eros, any erotic ability to deal, to have his power become like an erotic relationship with the people through art, in a way. And therefore we will slide into totalitarianism, something like that. That would be like the worst case scenario. But I think that there are a few people like us who are able to come at this sort of analytical view on Eros through experience and through analyzing, I think if you were to start making this ennobling portraiture and it fails to say seduce the subject of that portrait, that does not mean that there may not be another billionaire monarch who is actually seduced and who understands exactly what you are talking about. And it only takes one. It only takes one enlightened ruler to produce an era of enlightenment. So you have examples of this throughout history that, like Pericles and the first King Louis in France, the Sun King. So they produce a generation. Then of course there will be decadence again, and it will fall to pieces again. But for us in our lives, I think it's still possible to. I mean, we live in such an analytical period. We live in such a meta period that the odds of actually being able to penetrate with our work or with this discussion someone in the position of doing something with it are so slim, yet they are not zero.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's nothing else we can really do, because as we discovered, the kind of ambush technique or in my case, fact-checking contemporary art and telling them, by the way, you're all liars. That doesn't produce anything, and there's not even any risk.
Well, it does. It does produce something, but maybe you already have the information from that you needed. Look, I mean, you were just now referring to some specific situations that have affected you personally. I mean, we could talk about those if you want, because maybe it's a bit vague if they just hang in the air. But yeah, maybe. I mean, you would like that.
They're nothing to do with me, and I'll lose friends faster if I dwell on them. But I talked to Stefan maybe 2 years ago, and one of your collaborators, Sandra, staged an erotic ambush on a couple of friends of mine who will forever find it very, very difficult to forgive that. So one of the kind of public humiliations that happen in your films happened to one of my friends in real life. That's the situation that I'm able to mention, but it's not. Yeah, that's not particularly useful to. Don't know how useful that is to what we're talking about, but to go on.
Well, I think it is. Okay, let's take it seriously, because we're on this podcast. It's been mentioned now, so let's. I mean, okay. So having said what I just said, so we started off with this aggression because of Eros, because the lack we felt sort of excluded. Through autonomy, excluded from any engagement with both power, both society, any subject at all, thrown back upon the individual, but the individual is a young person who wants to become someone. And so you start performing out this becoming someone upon other people who could be described as wholly innocent, even if they are ignorant and like a pestilence for artistic production in a way. This is how we started, and this what this did is it, as we became older while we were doing that, and we were filling ourselves with that performance and everything it gave us. We attracted young people who were in a similar position as we had been before we started doing what we were doing. And we tried all kinds of ways of working with these very often, or actually always, exceptionally gifted people, young people, who were also completely excluded from doing, well, felt excluded because they were not able to use their talents to some end, whichever end at all. And I think this is what we made. Ultimately, we made episode 24 about this, which is Under a Sinking Sun, because when you start engaging with these young people, it's a very painful process because they start to. They're also manipulative. They mess with you. They tried it immediately made our little tiny little thing, which was just me and Stefan, and also by extension Tarek. It made us a court. Yeah. We became a little court of sorts, and we also had to deal with courtly things where you had these younger people who were now taking our words sort of as gospel, but they were also looking at us and seeing our own hypocrisy. It's trying to find our hypocrisy, trying to tear us down. And so that was very interesting. And I think the kind of working mode that came out of that is that if there were young people coming at us and they would want to do something with us, we would sort of allow them to use us to do what they thought was needed to break out of this erotic sort of vacuum. Vacuum. And in Sandra's case, she came to visit us when we were in the middle of the Welbeck trial, and this was like, I just gave birth to my second son, and I was overwhelmed, Stefan was overwhelmed, and we were also euphoric because this Welbeck thing was blowing up. So we felt, okay, this is super interesting. We have to use all the energy that's there, and I think Sandra understood. She understands sort of psychological things extremely well in this very autistic way. She's an observer. She's observed all the human behavior, but she was also a very heavy presence in our house because she's at the same. She observes all these things. She can. She cannot perform what she knows, what she understands psychologically, because she is very traumatized. She was sitting on the couch in our house, and she would be having a phone conversation with a friend and crying and talking about how her mother had said this or that, and she's been physically abused by her parents when she was young. Anyway, there's this whole story there, but she was there, and I was taking care of my baby, and she was driving me completely nuts. I felt like I couldn't go anywhere with the baby anymore, and I felt confined in my own house when she was there. But I also saw she understands a lot, and she needs to act out this trauma. And at the time, she was very much obsessed with this relationship that had ended with Daniel, and she was telling us all about it. And she had a whole plan, something that she was in Europe to do. She was going to go to London. She was going to set him up and going to tell him this and that. And she started a relationship with one of our assistants, who is Brandt, who wanted to do this with her, and we had everything to do with it in the sense that we are the we are the fosterers of this environment, which says if you think that you need to do something which is aggressive and which is against the social mores, in order to break out of your confinement, that is cultural, social, but also psychological, then find ways to do it. And I think me and Stefan, have always felt, and this is not to say that we are innocent or anything, but I think we are millennials or even boomerish to the extent that we always feel that the ambush should take place in a professional environment, so in a museum, etc. And actually, Welbeck, this is a different story. Welbeck was not ambushed by us. He has used this image of us to his own advantage, He's also played with it, but we did not ambush him. It was completely and totally
I think that's
open.
understood quite widely.
However,
At this
yeah,
stage,
I mean, yeah. So, and then we see this younger generation of KIRACians who are actually much more radical than we are, because they take this whole thing into the social sphere, into the intersocial sphere, and they. Oh, my glasses are. And they do their performance, and that's what happened.
I'm not going to respond to any of these details because, as I said, the conflict is not actually between. I'm not involved in the conflict in any way, and I find your account credible. And what I find interesting in it is the question of how the principles that we are building, you are building in particular, but a small bunch of us. Depressingly small bunch of us is trying to kind of dig at out of the kind of leftist marasm of pointless dying art, how that propagates. I think you're right, we're at this kind of moment where it's absolutely impossible to tell what on earth is going to happen. I have a slightly different experience of very young people. I, in fact, feel much more kind of Gen X depressed as opposed to millennial. A little bit like you, I think I feel a responsibility towards Zoomers and their generation. Like I run a place called Verdurin where I do events, and when people meet and talk and like try to be serious and, for lack of a better term, in a safe space where they can, they're not going to get cancelled. They can think about things that you can't think about institutions. A lot of these things are to do with art. And I'm finding actually in the London context where it comes to the Zoomer generation that they are very meek, they are anxious, and they're not interested in following through so much on ideas. And I have a slightly different experience therefore of trying to instill sort of a care for the artifact of their own creation. So that doesn't quite track, and I'm slightly envious. I would love to have a little coterie of people who like promote slightly stronger versions of my ideas, so I could just kind of brand them, promote them, and we could all have a jolly uncontrolled time. But yeah, the question of what happens structurally when ideas like the ambush, when ideas like the erotic, when ideas like indeed ennoblement happen. One of the things that I don't think I know enough about, and again, it's not clear to me even how one-on-one you're involved in, but this is the courtesy of an entire, so do my proposal for Venice, where again, we have this idea that an open call where we just go and reproduce more of this. There's even AI used to take some of these kind of aesthetic ideas, aesthetic techniques, and reproduce them. So we do have to think to a certain extent about what happens. Now, I'm not saying all of this with this kind of ethics of art making and care and all of that. None of this leftist bullshit that's completely created safetism and art that doesn't dare anything. I think it's okay to make some noses bleed. I think it's okay if this is actually something that our culture, both the left, both the kind of safety center, has not had a problem practicing. The fact that aesthetics is used to turn crowds against individuals, to call them out for the behavior. This is not something that you've invented. This is not something the writer's inventing. This is definitely not something that 2020 cancel culture or 2016 cancel culture invented. This is sort of like an idea that's got hundreds of years of history to it. So I think we have to think about these things, but I don't think we have to be like super cautious in a sense. The obverse of
But I don't understand. What was your question about? What did you want to understand about?
How do we want to talk about Venice for a moment? And like my second corollary in this is like, how do we conceptualize audiences for the kind of practice that you are interested in. So one, how do we take further this idea of reproduction? You have this example of your coterie, of Sandra, you have your little KIRACians going ahead. Now we have a much kind of bigger, potentially, idea of Venice, which is just taking some of these aesthetic aspects. I'm not, you can explain if you wish how closely linked aesthetically you are with any of this project, but okay.
We are not at all. So we're not. Tarek has his own unsafe house.
Right,
we are not on speaking terms either, since the Welbeck project, which is heartbreaking, but also kind of it came to a head between us, and it is quite like the inhoudelijk. Like content-wise, like the way we envision the future of art, and also within our own art, you can see this Venice project and the way they are going about it, the Unsafe House, versus our Ennobling portraiture. I think it's very exemplary of how we disagree on things. Where I think, I'm not saying that it's per definition uninteresting to do something at the Venice Biennale. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think it's potentially very interesting, but where I see that Tarek and the Unsafe House are going into a kind of collective dark fantasy AI-generated art, where the paranoia of the individual, who is no part of the power structure whatsoever at all, translates into grandiose fantasies of being in charge. I find limited, because it's unable to actually. It doesn't seek a position from which it can start to investigate the situation. This is something I very much aspire. I very much need. I very much also need to understand myself in a way, and this is why I think our art is going in the other direction.
This is very clarifying, and I think I appreciate now more the need for the erotic, because I see in the way that the Venice project was communicate this kind of temptation that could be a risk also to a sort of facile understanding of portraiture, which is that the kind of straightforwardly flattering representation is what at the moment seems to like break through in news cycles, the kind of Vanity Fair kind of magazine write-ups of what might be going on. And in the sense that I mentioned, the potential that our oligarch today is in fact entirely flattened, why would he then not opt to be portrayed as might be happening in the Venice project, indeed by AI, the one thing that has absolutely no access to eroticism, that is entirely controllable?
Well, I think they will. I think it is unattractive to this class, because they are not interested in things that are not actually look. So you may have some Vanity Fair write-ups, but it doesn't grab. It doesn't grab either the oligarch or the people. These are not big successful projects that many people are watching or are hot for. And there is the grandiosity of the fantasy, which is not challenged by the artists themselves, is I think a turn-off to someone who is like an oligarch, who is so trained in determining actual power, like seeing who is bluffing and who isn't, who actually has something on me. I think the only potential for art in this setting, the way society is moving now, the direction it's moving in, I mean, is if you are actually able to convince an oligarch in question that it is useful to him if he were to be seen deeply.
Yeah. Okay, so the question that I think is interesting to move to now, and you've already hinted at this, is who are the audiences and how do audiences for either of those projects, how do we reactivate the masses and make them interested in art? It is obvious, I think, to all of us that contemporary art, despite its sort of administrative attempts to render itself relevant to every little disadvantaged girl and boy, has absolutely no traction with the general populace. Nobody gives a fuck about what happens in museums, and that's maybe the correct way of doing things. There is certainly in things like the Venice Project an attempt to grab attention, and the attention is at the moment being grabbed, I think you are correct, it's being grabbed by the same class that creates the product, but it's incredibly unclear whether it has any ways of cutting through to beyond the kind of circle jerk of the Venice and the hyperallergic commentary that the proposal got. What is, to move to a positive, what is your relationship with an audience for you? And I think there is quite a lot of potential to really conceptualize something new and develop, particularly in your trajectory, like the ambush, the kind of critique that I used to produce, I would suggest is sort of quite internally aimed, and that runs in course. I mean, it produces spectacle that maybe is attractive to people and you, so it can attract outsiders. And I guess the intrigue of the art world is as good as the intrigue of a telenovela. So, I mean, there's no reason to think that that's in and of itself a dead end. But for your idea of this ennobling portraiture, there needs to be, well, we would like to figure out how it talks to people on purely aesthetic terms without necessarily, oh no, maybe that's not even the right question. I mean, who is, to ask you a very silly, simple question, who is that aimed at? You've conceptualized what this does for the oligarch. I've spoken about it's a kind of a covenant. But what is missing from the trajectory of contemporary art into the current moment, the idea is that the populace are part of the covenant. A person going into a museum looking at contemporary art does not understand what they are getting out of the artwork. The artwork and the art world have a codified system of thinking of what it is they do to the viewer. Yeah, we have plenty of theory of that, but not the other way around. So I'm wondering how you imagine this happens and what you might be doing.
My ideas on this are not fully formed, I would have to say. Like, I have intuitions, but this intuition starts with the oligarch. And it starts with saying, look, you have to offer people something, a piece of sky beneath which we all stand. And so this begins with a portrayal of this hypothetical oligarch, in a way. And then as to the question, who is the audience? I think if this were to work out, if you were to create not just a portrait of your monarchic oligarch, but also in working together in it. This person, you found this person who says, okay, I see why I should do this. Then you would have to think of. I mean, you have these old forms where you, for instance, you would have like the tragedies and the comedies in Greek theater, and you would also have the satire plays, which are kind of weird sexual Dionysian performances, which are very and like Shakespearean theater also has these satirical figures in it also always, who are like a representation of the populace, and or like a representation of those people whom the populace regard as sort of immoral among themselves, and comical, and therefore sort of the ones you don't want to identify with. You want to become, as an audience, you want to become the person who is in a way omniscient, and that's why it's like a Shakespeare play is ennobling, because it asks of its viewer to sort of identify both with the portrayals of the people in charge as with the people who are very much not in charge, but who are bumbling about in a way. Does this make sense?
Well,
Stefan, yes, you were to say.
No, but we were talking about how this is an opportunity to create also a new noble elite. So first you need this portrait of the ruler. And this is exciting, because is this going to go well? Is it going to end in a disaster? This will attract intellectual spectacle, intellectual curiosity, and an aesthetic elite will be formed around that who want to witness that. Basically, you're creating an aesthetic court. So I think the aim is to create this audience, to create this elite through something that is exciting, that is erotic, that has energy. Basically an alternative to what the contemporary art world is currently not doing, which is not founded on resentfulness, paranoia, like the Vienna thing of Tarek and Curtis we were just discussing, and which is also not founded on cultural pessimism. This sort of 20th century Michel Houellebecq problem. The Fukuyama and Houellebecq are both two sides of the same coin in that sense. So it's a way to create cultural optimism without it becoming utilitarian, Anglo-Saxic, like, let's say, Tyler Cohen proposes in his book about we should all be optimistic about culture. So we will create this audience, and we have already experienced it on a small scale how this functions. Through creating these KIRACians.
Yeah. Look, I mean, in the end, this is sort of a solution that we all land on. Absent this massive check for go and build me a Ministry of Culture, and I mean, we all might know that there are attempts in Washington by, well, I mean, a lot of kind of MAGA adjacent people are involved in trying to institutionalize a response that would do some of the things that you are talking about, but it would do it at a kind of state level. And those attempts, because they can only really try to mimic the institutional forms that are corrupted, they will fail to do what
they are reactionary.
They have access to, on the one hand, the long march from the institutions, just in reverse, and on the other, they have, they can try to create, I don't know, literally the Department for Culture in Washington D.C. Like, what a ridiculous idea is that in a place like the U.S. This is not going to go very far, I don't think, though it will produce fireworks.
Well, I don't even want to go as far as predicting how far it will go, because a lot of lame things have existed for a long time. But I think we are indeed offering the only forward alternative to that, which is not reactionary, which is not reacting to the old thing, which is based on Nietzsche's forward in The Birth of Tragedy, like the metaphysics of the artist, which is completely out of the discussion now, which is sort of Marxist left wing versus reactionary formal thinking or Christian thinking. Like these are the two tastes that you can choose from now. But there's a third one, and that's something that we have been developing for all these years. And I think an audience might be drawn to that because it is, in fact, something truly new, something that truly stands on the shoulders of both Marxism and Christianity, and is not a withdrawal from progress. Cultural progress, aesthetical progress, because I think basically what the technological elite wants to do now is basically say we no longer need cultural progress or aesthetics because technology is going to do that. We're going to accelerate. We're going to see what AI is going to do. Let's max everything up. Fuck it.
Oh, look, what if
and therefore we're, as a sort of pastiche, we can stamp in things like Christianity again, or come with. I mean, I like the Mars thing that Elon Musk is doing because it's this Apollonian thing in a very literal sense. But it would be great if there would be a more complex discourse around it, and there is an opportunity for that. I think he's missing out. I think this whole Musk thing is brilliant, and he, I'm blabbering a bit, but I think that's my point.
This is a good articulation of the market gap, for lack of a better word. But there is another question which is sort of troubling me, which is that it is possible that those who think we no longer need culture to determine politics could potentially be right. I mean, that means that all of us are out of a job, that we are wasting our time. I'm struggling to recall the argument precisely, but I was talking to Philip Cunliffe, whose book called The National Interest that was launching here, and he talks about project of nation building, which has a lot of the kind of aims that you are talking about. It's more democratic than in any sense monarchic, the approach, but it still has the idea of constituting a common consciousness. But he, like a lot of political theorists who are saying anything other than let's do more technocracy, let's do more of what we used to do to prevent the fascists from coming, he's sort of saying that actually no, we don't need culture. We need this kind of super rational discussion about what our shared interests are, and they indict culture with having got us to where we have. It's very difficult to argue at the level of, look, you've had a go. Contemporary art is only one moment and one kind of particularly disastrous moment in the long history of cultural primacy, which is what marks modernity.
Yeah.
The fact that
Kate, can you formulate an answer to Pierre, which is not just no? I think actually the rationalist had to go for a way too long time, because that would also be a reaction to that. Like, is there anything you could say to that, which goes beyond that?
I don't really know where I was going with all of this, but the worry that I'm still struggling to articulate is kind of real. One that we don't have that many examples, but the knee-jerks, the cultural knee-jerks that you describe as reactionary, when they happen at scale, they take the form of things like the Venice Proposal, which has the problems we've already discussed and I think agreed on to a great extent. We also have the evidence base of our oligarchs not being so interested in culture. And if we think about the relationship of power and knowledge, Kate earlier said that oligarchs do know precisely how power works. are they not telling us is that they don't need this service, this thing this phrase from Pierre that I completely love, that artists are sign painters for hire. You are, in a sense, proposing to do that, but to do it well, to do it in a way that is not devoid of aesthetic possibilities of transcendence, and doesn't just go, isn't just commercial in a kind of straightforward sense. So I think there is a worry that we have some evidence that we are, to a certain extent, irrelevant. I also, like the second corollary of this is what I mentioned about the quality of the artifact in directed at audiences, particularly younger audiences. I mean, this is a horrible generalization, but I mean, I've said that I'm finding that to get a 23-year-old Zoomer to actually finish a train of thought and to engage with an artifact beyond the fact that it exists and it provides some kind of social facilitation, that I found quite difficult. So I don't know, is culture maybe indeed over, and what we do will be therefore by retro definition reactionary as well. It will just be an attempt to recreate the 17th century and 18th century maybe at points.
But what would a rational discussion look like?
Yeah, exactly.
If you have no culture that embeds this rationalism. If you have these oligarchs saying, well, you know what, we'll just go for Christianity now because that appears to work and it appears to be something that people are pivoting back towards anyway, so let's do that. And then let's also have a rational discussion. These things do not go together. You cannot tell an atheist or agnostic people to sort of abandon what they think is their truth and to then also take part in a rational discussion. So the thing is, I think it's I think that there will be people who are so, I mean, I don't feel like culture and what I produce is a failure at all. I believe in it. I truly believe in what I do, and I believe in its value. And I also believe in my ability to communicate this value. So I might be disproven, but that will be a fact then. I'm not worried about it now. It doesn't influence my, if anything, it strengthens my it strengthens how excited I feel about what I am doing. But the thing is that, I think my main point is that a rational discussion really isn't anything at all without culture or art that also embeds this rational discussion within, and also counters it with everything that is irrational about people. Rationalists have no way to deal with that part of humanity. And if you say, well, we'll find ways to work around it, those ways, is my very strong belief, will lead to totalitarianism.
Look, I mean, I'm without wishing.
Can you explain why? Why you think that?
Because you are then always going to be using your accelerating technology as something that is positioned downstream, where you are trying to make the people meeker than they already are by emphasizing sort of the streams that they are inclined to join. And then, but behind that, there is these figures who are, who are steering that towards a certain direction, who are in charge, but there is no relationship between the people who are being ruled and the ruler. And it will I mean, there will be people who are aware of this, and there will be a lot of people who are not aware of this. And the people who are aware of this will try to fight it, and there will be and the rulers in charge will have no other means other than to forcefully hit that down, any kind of elite response, because that is all they have. They will have only violence and submission at their hands.
Look, I think I find this compelling, and this is an aspect in which you and I are artists next to being critics, because the critical position would sort of voice the doubt that I did, and the artistic response would be sort of faith-based and would be critical in a kind of old-fashioned sense that we don't necessarily see anymore, which is judgment-based, essentially saying we want to propagate this particular mode of thinking, we want to propagate this kind of mode of production, because for reasons that I think you quite nicely put just now, Kate, we have to make a decision about the world we are going to live in. And the choice is quite stark. I mean, it usually is. This is why conversations are worth having. There are not that many points in a person's lifetime, historically, in which the end of history had been true for long enough for these questions not to be relevant. And I think you are more than likely right that the contrasts are exactly kind of submission and authoritarianism, these two being, I'm using submission in a Elbeckian sense, and authoritarianism, this kind of new center-left technocratic, like these two things can come together, they are coming together. The UK has literally this summer having such a wake-up moment where this is becoming obvious to the entire populace that all of this is happening. And it is sort of heartening, in a sense, in the way that gets condemned by all media as racist and xenophobic. It is heartening that the populace, as it develops a consciousness of its encroaching oppression, it turns to culture. So what's happened in the UK for the last couple of weeks is that people have been erecting Union flags and St. George's Cross, the national symbols. And of course, there's been instant pushback because the liberal centre-left and the apparatus see this as declaration of racist attitudes, which it might well be. I'm definitely not going to argue that it isn't, that everything is innocent. Yeah.
Well, I think that the very crucial thing is that it may be heartening, it may not be, but the thing is that if there is no aristocracy in the literal sense of the word to make sense of these, to fill in, let's say, what the Union Jack stands for, English culture. If there is no aristocracy, no elite saying, well, this is what it is, then it has all the potential of becoming racism and just the basest feelings, sentiment, Blut und Boden feelings that the masses are then tended to go to. And this is just one route also towards, like, it plays into the hands of very powerful figures.
This is why I wanted. Yeah.
I mean, that's what Elon Musk is doing. Like, he's sharing that cross now on the internet because he feels that power. Yeah. But he's not communicating that in an aristocratic,
and look,
way.
This is the place in which we do need to be careful. And it's heartening in as much as that the symbolic potential of these place markers, the rectangle in which you can put your symbols is still relevant, that it has potency in the popular imagination. Still,
no, I don't agree with you. I think it's not. It doesn't tell you anything at all because these symbols are always.
I'm referring to the blank rectangle in the first instance. That even the blank rectangle still gets tangled up, if not overrides material concerns, the kind of rational conversation Yeah, and the rational conversation could well be hyper-racist if it was happening in an unchecked way, as it does occasionally on social media and lands people in prison. So I think without, I haven't yet quite articulated this, but I think you are also right that there is a great concern about how the symbols are translated. It possibly sounds like I'm kind of backpedaling, but to take to an extreme what you've just suggested, the kind of aristocratic sphere, which is not necessarily even the oligarch, it's possibly the aristocratic artist in a sense. We are waiting.
Exactly.
We are them to be able to deal with the severity of the situation. What we fucking need is an artistic revolution, not just kind of an attempt to to wait it out, to see whether we can offer something to the few people in power. Because to be perfectly clear, contemporary art as a paradigm has been a tool for exerting authoritarian control over the image. This is something that comes in with the Reformation. Yeah? The control of the image is something that matters to people in power. There is the split between Catholicism and Protestantism plays itself out over the image. We have iconoclasm wars, image wars. They continue all the way. Why does Just Stop Oil attack paintings and then make arguments about what they stand for in civilization and culture? It is just like the image has not mattered more. It doesn't matter any less now than it has mattered before. And this is what I meant by the kind of heartening of like, look, this signifier is there. What it stands for is indeed open. This is what Philip Cunliffe would have wanted to rationally discuss. He wants the Union flag to acquire meaning through rational means. I think it's possibly right that it's impossible to do the two things at the same time. But who then gets the initiative? Who gets to rig it? So the question again, is it you, in a very, very plural, you the kind of artist that you represent, in collaboration with
I think there is nobody, to be very honest, we are just us. It's really, there is nobody who is doing what we are doing. So in that sense, you don't want to sort of politely make this discussion unfaithful to the truth. Nobody is doing what me and Stefan are doing. And so it's up to us, really. It's up to us to at least at least make this ennobling portraiture and what we mean by it. And then and other people, I mean, they can. I mean, if there are other artists who have their own methods, it's up to them as well. But no, there is no you in a plural sense. We're the only ones doing this. It is and that is the reason that this is essential is because it is a thought out idea. It is a falsifiable thought out idea, just as Nietzsche's metaphysics are a response to Christianity. It's not something, and this is something that has been traditionally cast out of art by the last. Picasso was still consciously thinking about art and how it would be society building. Beyond, and then after the Second World War, it has been eradicated from art to use art in that sense, to actually think of art as a cultural technology rather than a propaganda.
Yeah,
covert propaganda.
Whether the distinction between social technology and propaganda really holds, I think, is debatable. We can use,
No. Of course, it's both technology. It's both technology, but to what ends? Like, is it a technology to discover something ennobling, which stands above what you already know, or is it projecting something to consolidate your own power, etc.? I think that's what Kate means with technology. Technology always tries to create progression instead of consolidation.
Well, the question is really whether you... This is the question that I had to ask myself. Is there anything that I hold above anything else? Is there really? Or am I a nihilist in a sense? And I have come to the conclusion that there are certain... which I have sort of... I always held, but I've like engaging with these new ideas that are like the Christianity that is being... that is going hand in hand with this sort of accelerationist belief that is coming out of Silicon Valley, is do I hold certain achievements of humanity as something that is exceptional and worth promulgating? So, and the answer is yes. I think I am a Nietzschean, and I do believe that there are moments in history that people have been able to liberate themselves of idolatry and bijgeloof.
Suspicion?
No, not suspicion. Bijgeloof. Never mind. Anyway, they've been able to liberate themselves of idolatry, and they have been truly aristocratic. The best. The people who are able to liberate themselves from the
Superstition.
From superstition, and enlightened. And this is something that this is a flame that I want to keep burning.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, the answer to that question is because I regard that as a higher achievement, and it is better than the alternative.
Yeah, so again, we have the question of judge.
Is it that simple? Can you not explore that further? I mean, like, is that the answer to that question, Kate?
Well, because if you let go of that as a very base moral assumption, then you get this kind of maximalist thinking, right? Which I see as progressing towards totalitarianism, and I'm not naive when I'm saying that, like, generally these are just the worst circumstances for people to live in. It's just hell.
Look, I think what you were nodding to again, Kate, is the possibility and the importance of judgment, and that is something that we have eroded both in the arena of criticism and art, to the extent that it's just not practiced at all, but also in the sense that I think we also mentioned earlier, like being able to differentiate between one version and another. You know, like not everything is the same, and we should be able to say that certain types of production, whether it's artistic or social or material, serves our desires, our needs, and our, well, sort of helps us towards human flourishing, which I think is a phrase that Stefan, you used in the post. And that brings me to the kind of question that we've been reverberating, but the sort of most central question of all social systems, and also in my study of sort of theorization of the relationship between art, aesthetics, and power and society, a lot of which, you know, if you read the first 40 years of French publishing by the likes of Baudelaire, Saint-Simon, and Courtiers in the early 1800s, like every single permutation of these relationships is already rehearsed by those thinkers. Nothing we have invented since is actually fundamentally new. It just has the idea of freshness because we had forgotten. So many of the proposals that these thinkers make for how art and society could work together rely on a shared understanding of human flourishing, which is essentially a way of saying we need certain types of actors to come together and be of one judgment, to say A is better than B, we are going to go with A. And how on earth do we do that on a societal level is a question that we haven't resolved. We have democracy, we have representative democracy to do that, but that has its great problems. And to bring it back in a very kind of hammy way to where I think this question applies to any artistic project, particularly any artistic project that wants to take itself out of the confines of the contemporary art world institutions, in which the consensus of, or rather the idea of what human flourishing means is given from the top as dictated, is how you build a coalition in which your sense of human flourishing, your subjects, your oligarch sense of human flourishing, and to a small extent, possibly through inspiration, your audience's sense of human flourishing are kind of one and the same. How do you exercise judgment? So that also implies to a certain extent the moral question, how do you find your oligarch who's got the same morals as you, and morals that can be taken as a sort of basis for ennoblement. But yeah, is it clear how we even communicate this? How do we communicate this without turning artistic production into the same kind of political discourse that has completely ruined contemporary art, because everything has accountability circles built into it and tedious theory. So maybe like a practical question to make it very basic, though by all means don't feel obliged to address this, is who are your benevolent oligarchs? Are there like versions of Philippe that you have access to that you can work with? But I think more interestingly, like how do we build that kind of moral judgment universe together with these people, so the transaction is not just this kind of completely, hey, we're gonna make you look cool and powerful, because that already exists. That kind of, you need to be able to be aligned so you can actually produce truth, that there can be critique in your ennobling portrait, that aspiration and truth happens. You talk about Shakespeare being able to do this, and he's obviously one of those writers who are able to both portray rulers in this kind of light in which they're receivers of divine power, but they're also hunchbacks, they're also corruptible, they're also filled with very human desires. So am I right in thinking that you need to be part of a sort of shared moral universe to be able to produce this? And if so, how do we practically even find people to do that? Because it's not clear that we have means of building such coalitions now.
Stefan, do you have an answer to this?
No. I think you have an answer to it, but I think you should take your time.
I do have a tendency to make my questions longer than any answer, but yeah.
No. There was.
No,
you repeated your question a couple of times, but that doesn't matter. I think
it's also not clear. It's also not clear
about
who's
the shared
interviewing
morality.
whom and what we're talking about. So go on.
Okay, let me go at it intuitively. Like, is the answer into the conversation that we were recently having at the lake, Kate, about there are no moral facts? Is it there to be found? The answer to this question.
Yeah, is it abstract?
I don't know, like how
I feel like Pierre is really asking about like a logistic or architectural.
Well, that's downstream, but it's more
where
a better question would have been to do with judgment, shared exercise of judgment. I think the abstract is supposed to be more interesting for us as thinkers.
I mean, in the end, you need a metaphysics to create this sort of shared morality, and I think it's precisely there.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
That's the architecture, that's the logistics of it.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, and so in that sense, it then it's very much sort of still the same answers I gave to your previous question, where there comes this point when you're in this performative art making, where you're constantly turning values over, and is it really a value or is it not? And this is also your critical power, because these are like atomic, like nuclear moments where suddenly some things that people thought were connected, you break them apart, and something like truth comes shining through. But once you start thinking about this in a political sense, as we have refrained from doing actually in the beginning, because we were anti-political, we were about the aesthetical position. But now I think it makes sense to think about it in a political sense, because we have this, the world that we are portraying is also changing. So the political discussion becomes a discussion, or becomes the legitimizing discussion of your artwork, but it also becomes your visionary, your tendrils into the future, and where what society is this artwork in motion with. And I think then the notion of judgment, like your deepest convictions, they come into play. You have to start thinking about what are they, and you will start to recognize that the history of human thought, of morality, the genealogy of morality, is always a sort of wrestling match between, like, like the Catholics type of truth, revelation, and Protestant, where you're tearing something down, and behind that the truth appears. And I think what Nietzsche has done, and this is why I would look upon him as a kind of prophet of a future enlightenment, the only possible prophet is that he bears both these powers within him, and he explains this in the artist's metaphysics, in the preface to Birth of Tragedy, which later written preface, much later, around the time of the Afgodenschemering, Dawn of Idols. Anyway, where he describes basically that it is a kind of a moral obligation to constantly tear apart your perception of the truth from the morals, but that this in itself is, and he doesn't say this explicitly, but this in itself is a moral obligation. And this allows for, I think this is enlightened because it allows for the highest perspective possible. And it constantly puts the person who is trying to wield their consciousness under pressure to do so at the highest possible level. And while not losing ground, not losing their sense of humanity, which is goodness. So it's like a renaissance. I'm a renaissance. I believe in that. I'm a humanist, even though I think all kinds of humanistic cliches have borne on us very heavily after the Second World War. It's become perverted. But I think we have to find a way to be enlightened. I believe in that very much. This is what my philosophical. This is where I've come back to.
I don't know if I have a response that's different to my earlier response. I mean, you might have noticed what I'm always stuck on in my thinking. I'm sort of my understanding of the art world has been through thinking about systems, and I have this propensity to always think about how things scale. And what you've just articulated, Kate, like concepts like goodness, how they scale in modern societies, is a question that we don't really have any answers for.
Well, I think this is where where this ennobling portraiture is an activistic, because you're saying, and we've seen it in the history. It's not, is that we have these figures who are now in this transition in the U.S. We've had this transition of power. The liberal elite has lost their political power. And it has revealed to us clearly that there are people behind the scenes who are thinking about our future and who are influencing it in ways that are beyond our grasp and that are not democratic. And that's not, I'm not saying that it is bad because it's not democratic. It's simply a fact. It means that we cannot reach these people via democratic means. And so that's where the artwork is like a way to, for these, and the danger that for these people who are becoming visible as people who are pulling strings, is that they attract all kinds of ire from the people who feel that they are out of powerless at trying to reach us. So it is also explosive in a kind of revolutionary sense, and they are aware of this. But you want to grab their attention at the point at which they are trying to figure out: are we going to respond to this danger that we perceive in a repressive manner, or are we going to respond to it in a way that actually takes away the problem, which is that there is no communication possible between these classes. Yeah. And art is such a communicating valve, if you want to use the ugly word for it. So, because it's not a valve, because I would rather call it a shared metaphysics, which is this sense of shared responsibility. You have the people who have a responsibility of being the people, and you have the ruler who has the responsibility of being a good ruler. And so I think the scalability of this idea rests on this very slim chance that you are able to actually convince this ruling class that they do not need to, that they should also consider methods of communicating with the public which are not repressive. In other words, cultural, artistic, artworks that show that this ruler in case has is reaching out his hand as a sign of trust, where he says, I'm trusting people that they are also able to think for themselves, that we are able to define truth together.
Yeah, I think, look, without wanting to flatter you too much, I think this is not a bad idea in any sense, not that this is something you need to hear from me. I think what you are proposing has a good understanding of the autonomy of art, which is completely contrary to the contemporary art and like modern art understanding of autonomy, in which it is the art as in your terms, a shared metaphysics that matters, that is worth reproducing. Contra the contemporary understanding of the artist being somehow autonomous, and therefore the artist's politics being somehow autonomous, and the subject. And the kind of counterexample that I can think of, well, not counterexample, but like my way of thinking about this is not necessarily the idea of ennoblement, but actually the idea of transcendence being produced or stimulated through art. If you think about religious rather than royal art, there are so many potent examples in which precisely what you described, the fact that art is used to make a connection, a very tangible connection, a valve, to use your word, but I think pipe is what you meant rather than a valve, to make a connection between an earthling and the celestial. The two do not come together. That is an incredibly exciting project to be involved in, and one can look at lives of artists over centuries and completely understand why they would devote themselves under the conditions of patronage and the very strict conditions of courtly life and participation in social hierarchies, that they would devote themselves to the kind of project of enabling transcendence. the slight snag that, again, I'm re-articulating something I said before, is that we currently live in a world in which your suggestion just now, Kate, that the ruler and the ruled are not the same person, that is not something that we believe. We're told by contemporary democratic systems that we are all the same. Foucauldian conceptions of power sort of spread everything together. There is no fundamental distinction between Peter, Phil, and me according to contemporary arts. And that is a block in the understanding of the potential of what you are proposing as a translation mechanism. And translation is a terrible word actually, because I don't mean that we can, by portraying an oligarch, we get to understand what they really are like, because that invites, I think, ill-advisedly already an attack and deconstruction. It's essentially, it does the political thing of like, we portray powerful people so that we can partake in the power, either antagonistically or as bottom feeders. This is entirely pointless. I mean, it could be a useful political project for many people. It will not produce good art. But to say again, I sort of believe you. I think this should be possible. I don't think human nature has changed post Second World War or since modernity to the extent that a transcendental or ennobling art would not work. I mean, I think that this would be an idea of, a sort of social consciousness evolving at a pace that it never has. So yeah.
So just from my stupid, naive understanding of so ennobling, I would say, would mean it relates to how you relate to other human beings, a noble relationship. Whereas transcendence is about going beyond the limits of life as we are currently in, and of course, in a religious context, this means going to heaven or being in connection with the divine, and maybe the material and the sort of immaterial are coming together in this sort of accelerationist idea with transcendence and living in a simulation and like extending your conscious through I don't know, AI, stuff like that. So transcendence means something different now than it used to mean 2,000 years ago because of technology.
That's not the sense I was invoking. I was definitely talking about I was talking about transcendence and with the example of Renaissance art. Yeah, it's the kind of access to the heavenly, or the kind of fledgling moment of imagining that one has access to the heavenly, that one has communicated with the godly. That's all I meant. I'm definitely not talking about transcendence in any sense that has anything to do with transhumanism.
Can I ask a stupid question,
today.
Kate?
That's not at all. What are we talking about?
Okay. Thank you for.
Yeah.
I understand. Kate, can you explain to me what you think he means with transcendence in a Renaissance sense?
Well, I think it's so. I also just said where how I thought Nietzsche sort of embodies both the transcendent quality that is in like the Catholic tradition of Christianity, and the I said revelation, but and the opposing force of Protestantism, which is to tear down and to reveal truth in that way by iconoclastic force. And I think that I agree with Pierre in that where I would qualify art as a non-repressive technology versus the repressive tendencies that I would predict you will see amongst oligarchs who say we don't need art, we don't need culture. They will have to turn to repressive forms, because art in it has this ability, and this is, I think, what you're talking about, Pierre, with Renaissance art and transcendence too. You have an artwork, a Christian, which is a Christian scene, and it is an interpretation by the artist for the people who visit, say, the church. Let's say Michelangelo, and it is not repressive because it is perceptive. It is like, first the artist does the work of thinking of, okay, I'm confined by both the religious narrative, and I'm confined by my patrons and what they expect. But I have the freedom, I have myself with which to interpret the space that is there. And this space is life. It's life itself. That's what the artist does. He produces something that resembles life. And it's for the people who visit and who will look at the Sixtine Chapel, they can also suddenly, the religion that is implicit and the patrons, they are together with you in that artwork. You are sharing this space, and it feels not beautiful. It feels good. You like to be literally in the space of the artwork, but you also like to be in the world that surrounds it, and it's good. And you want to make that world. You want to live up to the sense that you have of that world, and you become a nobler person. So this is where I would say transcendence
I can complete this circle
noblesse,
with this kind of religious imagery for
related.
you. I think this is quite good what you're suggesting here, particularly the idea of living in a shared universe, which I think even your idea of portraiture, we mustn't. I don't imagine for a second that you are thinking about portraiture as something that has very defined borders, and in fact, I don't think historic portraiture would be so confined. I'll give you another religious experience that I think completes the other side that you are proposing, which is a different form of aesthetic practice. One of my friends who's a Christian convert, from rampant cocaine snorting liberal to Anglo-Catholic to eventually Wahhabi, but he's still at a kind of Catholic stage. He took me to a sung Latin mass. This is quite rare. Of course, Britain is a Protestant country. We don't have that much Catholicism, but a mass sung in Latin is quite.
But
we do have Catholicism, but it is still. We essentially we're not Protestant in a sense that the Netherlands is Protestant. Of course not. This is not like. Anyhow, this is the destruction.
No. Not at all.
What does a sung Latin mass look like? We sat at the back of the church, sort of watched some of the people, very interesting characters, like a 2 meter tall, 22-year-old looking woman with a dog that was as tall as her. She goes to the front pew, sort of amazing. And then the singing starts, the priests arrive, and my first thought is, gosh, we should have sat at the front to be able to hear the choir who are at that point above us and slightly to the back. If we sat at the front, we would experience this slightly better. And then it takes me another 5 seconds to realize, oh my God, I'm so stupid. This isn't for me. The priest is not singing for me. The paintings in this chapel are partly to all of the things that you described a moment ago. But just like the chant, they are also for God. The singing is there to let me understand that this thing is bilateral, that it's there to give me this experience, but it also has that connection to God. And now this is probably completely sacrilegious, but I think in your proposal, there is a need for the portraiture, for the artifact, to produce something for both parties. You need to entice your oligarch, your aristocrat, into that world by offering him that portrait. And that portrait has to do a lot more than just flatter my 12-year-old version in my oil portrait commissioned by my father. It has to compel them the way that the sung mass compels God to come into first the priest's realm, into the liturgy, and therefore through all the artifacts that are in the church, into the congregation, into the real world. It's a sort of bilateral act in a sense. And I think this is the very important thing. It sort of comes up. It's another way of phrasing that kind of moral questions of, how do you make sure that the oligarchs are part of the same moral universe that you are? Well, part of the job is for you to entice them. And from my memory of like the way that you did this with your patron Philippe, I think this is something that is possible, that it's not actually that difficult. It is to do with making people part of a world.
Well,
the production of an artwork has some kind of a magic to it that I think we can build on. It is not a mistake that social practice took off, that community arts that were sort of active in the UK at least until about the 80s were as potent. The idea of being in an artwork being a subject of an artwork is indeed almost automatically elevating.
Well, I think where the Eros element comes in again is that there is this kind of people are so antithetical in their way of thinking. How do you say it again?
Categorical.
Either this or either that. Categorical probably is that. So when I can see it happening, that someone now expects that we are going to make this kind of sort of almost like reactionary Christian artwork or something. But I think that that the other force that I was just talking about, the iconoclastic force, which by reactionary contemporary artists is usually sort of pointed at as the source of decadence, the source of decline, is I think it is very much part of our truth-seeking ability as human beings. That's why there are these two forces within this one single, very, very long tradition of Christianity. And it is a very necessary erotic element also of this relationship that we have. For instance, the actual relationship that we have with Philip, it is not just because we entice him and how do we do this? We do this also by infuriating him and by being honest or by becoming like we are also sometimes sycophants to him without even knowing it. And this is. But the point is that the artwork, when you're making it, it will project back at you as an artist, and if you embody this sort of Nietzschean artistic metaphysics, and you keep, once you're working at the artist, you come back to the moral obligation of tearing apart, of creating this aesthetic position on the whole, then I think you are able to make an artwork that reflects all these different human sides, where you're both a sycophant and a iconoclast and ennobling, but no, the effect is ennobling. The artwork itself is full of banality and things that people would like to erase from the artwork, but which completely kills it.
Yeah, and there I think lies the communication with this God. So I really love this idea of people trying to produce something that they experience as beautiful, and therefore they expect God also to really enjoy what they give him. You give God a fruit because you like fruit or meat, etc. And of course, this sort of conflation of king and God, which is, like super anthropological. But but there's something funnier. When Michel Welbeck and me didn't split well in the hotel room in Amsterdam. And then afterwards were some emails sent. We were friendly to each other, but it was not very good. And then when I released the trailer, which I 3 days before had shared with him, but he didn't react to it.
He did, but not...
He did, but not... I don't know, okay, doesn't matter. But when I made the trailer, I thought he would love it. There's childbirth. It opens with the birth of my child. Then you see him it's this sort of play on Christmas, on innocence, on the transactionary nature of this Christmas tale. And of course it infuriates him. It caused lawsuits and stuff happened. But I think this is the sort of gonzo element that we now have. We can actually talk to our gods, and God will sort of talk back. And this is where the conflation of the king and God, or the billionaire and God, or the caricature of the billionaire.
Of course, you can make God an object of your work and a man a subject of your work, and the offering of the grape to God is also not sort of straightforwardly benevolent, because we have plenty of cultures that offer child sacrifice to the gods. So all of this does continue to require judgment. Look, I think that the trajectory you describe it's interesting, and I think it's the experiences, the way that you draw on your work with Philippe on the Elbeck moment. I think that puts you in good stead. But flattering aside, I'm going to ask you the kind of the most practical question. Are you going to tell me and indeed your audience what on earth you're going to make? Stefan, when you told me, I think it was about 2 years ago that we spoke on the phone for quite some minutes, and that was the point where the Elbeck situation was really raw, and you were in a throes of making something truly beautiful. You were making a film that would reflect on this experience. I don't think you've released that much since, though I acknowledge that I've not necessarily been clicking on every single thing that you've posted. But the question is what happens? What does this portrait that you want to make, what does it look like? Who is it with? Because we are really at this point where experimentation needs to happen, not necessarily in your practice, but if you think about the way that you structure your manifesto, Stefan, everyone who's within reading reach of that statement agrees with the first paragraph, which says contemporary art is over, let's move on. Some people agree, some people disagree with the opposition to the reactionary impulse. So now we need to have examples, and you have critics in your acronym, but you are actually artists. I unfortunately am just a bloody critic. I don't get to make art. I only make, I do color.
Well, you almost made me cry with the church, with the church scene.
But that's not art. I didn't. If I had intended to make you cry, I could have been an artist. I'm not. I can do coloring in. I can do kind of artistic readings of art for conservative readerships in what I do. You need to make the bloody thing, and I kind of want to see it so that you can keep on making it, and many other people can make things, because there's so much kind of just suspended animation. This is one of the reasons that the oligarch has no interest in culture, because it has not seen any culture. There's nothing other than party circuits downtown New York, and that's beginning to happen in London. Yeah, it's boring.
Times Square.
We need to make this art. What are you doing?
Yeah, I have decided to stop talking about work in progress, because I'm so bad at it, and I really fuck up stuff. But Kate is better at separating, at synthesizing what we can discuss and what we cannot discuss without making it lame or just
just give me a date for an opening so we can come and look at something. I mean, this is, come on.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, okay, you answer. I cannot.
Oh,
sure. If you don't.
Yeah, well, we are a little. I am a little bit traumatized as well by the past years, because we've.
But it's coming soon. It's really coming.
It is soon. Really. We are now. We've been
4
working.
weeks.
We've been working on the Welbeck film, but we discovered that we need a perspective from which you tell this story, because it is an end of an era. It's about an end of an era, but what era and where is it headed to? So that's where you can sort of place the ennobling portraiture, which has been the result of our sort of endeavors once we identified this problem with the Welbeck film. But I'm confident, and also I'm seeing it in the edit that we are currently making, that we will be able to make the first out of a series of films that also includes the Welbeck adventure, and that we will make the first of that series before the end of this year.
That's something to look forward to. Yeah, well, look, like I'm. Yeah.
And it will be a very good one, because it will be the one that really sets the tone, that sets the pace and the perspective.
If the last we've been talking for over 2 hours, if the approach you have tried to articulate, which I kind of understand, has developed from probably 3 years of work and like the last 2 years of some kind of trauma, if you're serious about this, then yeah, it is going to be kind of important to set the tone. But you've got enough anxiety as artists already. You don't need any more of that for me. Send it my way. Yeah. Screen it at my place in London. Do whatever you need to do.
Yeah, let's do it. It feels really good. You're really. This was a very good conversation. You're a very good conversation leader, also.
That's right. Enough.
Yeah. Shall we end here? Is this it?